Recording started.
Hello, and welcome to the Train the Trainer Learning Session 3 webinar. My name is Katie Swanson, and I am one of the content specialists here at the Nemours National Office of Policy and Prevention for the National Early Care and Education Learning Collaborative Project. Today, we will review the Learning Session 3 presentation, as well as provide additional support to prepare you for the upcoming learning session. Please have that participant handbook available, as well as your implementation guide to use as a reference as we review the information. Shown here is the Learning Session 3 agenda. As you can see, this session will focus on how providers can continue to make healthy changes by improving practices specifically around physical activity and screen time. So as you remember, Learning Session 2 was all about healthy eating, breastfeeding support, and family-style dining. So we're going to shift gears to the remaining Let's Move childcare goals and focus on the best practices for physical activity and screen time. The action period tasks for Learning Session 3 include creating a long-term action plan and another storyboard. Participants should have received 2 trifold boards at the last learning session. They used the first one for that pilot action plan, and they'll now go ahead and use the second board to start their storyboard during the Learning Session 3 action period. I will go into this in a little bit more detail in just a bit. Please keep in mind that in addition to the participant handbook, which should be distributed 1 per participant, there are many resources to distribute during the learning session. However, the resources shown here, each program should receive 1 of each. So they'll receive the Nemours Best Practices for Physical Activity Guide, the Sesame Street Healthy Habits for Life Toolkit, and 2 physical activity kits, one called Moving and Dancing and the other one called Tossing and Catching. We've built these resources into the presentation to allow you to introduce them and conduct activities from all, especially the physical activity kits and the Sesame Street Healthy Habits for Life Toolkit. You'll notice that the physical activity breaks throughout the presentation. We really ask you that you just pick an activity of your choosing from one of those kits or the Sesame Street Healthy Habits for Life and conduct it with the programs and participants so that they can be introduced to it at that time. So as participants arrive, welcome them back to the learning sessions. Collect the pilot action plans, and if possible, if you have a copy machine on site, make copies for the programs, yourselves, and the project coordinator if he or she wishes to have a copy. It is important for you all to have a copy of the program's pilot action plan, mainly because this will help guide your technical assistance between Learning Session 3 and 4. It is also important for programs to have a copy in order to build from it or identify additional best practices that they would like to meet for their long-term action plan, which they'll start during the Learning Session 3 action period. So during the check-in and evaluation timeframe, go ahead and distribute the Learning Session 2 post-test and the Learning Session 3 pre-test. Also ask participants to take some time to set up their storyboards around the room prior to completing those pre- and post-tests. Ask participants to complete the evaluation tools and collect them, and if there's time remaining, encourage them to network and view some of the storyboards and ask other programs about the healthy changes they've made to their program so far. Once you've received all the evaluation forms, go ahead and begin the presentation. A couple of slides in, you'll notice that you'll have to divide the group into their TA breakout groups to discuss the Learning Session 2 action period tasks. This is really to check in to see how it went, how they liked doing the pilot action plan, what some of the challenges were, the barriers, some of their successes. Okay, and if you use the morning breakout group discussion notes found in your implementation guide, that'll really help you guide that discussion. All right, so we're going to dive into the Learning Session 3 content, again, around physical activity and screen time. So after you review the Learning Session 2 action period tasks with your TA breakout groups, or as a large group if you like to keep everybody together, you'll move on to allowing participants to share the wonderful changes that they've made so far through the implementation of their pilot action plan. You'll notice on the agenda that there are now 2 different segments throughout the day to have participants present their storyboards. This first segment is 45 minutes, and the second one will be held after lunch and will be 30 minutes in length. Before the learning session, or as people are checking in, use large chart paper or board to create a graph with the Let's Move childcare goals. At the bottom of the large piece of paper, list the goals horizontally. Include the goals of healthy eating, healthy beverages, physical activity, screen time, and breastfeeding support. Before the presentation, distribute 5 different color small sticky notes. Each color should represent a different goal. For example, you might want to use yellow for healthy eating or blue for physical activity. After the program presents, they will place the color sticky note that correlates with the goals they reached and place it on the bar graph. At the end, you will have a visual of all of the goals the programs have worked on through their pilot action plan. It's just a nice visual to have for everyone. Decide how you would like to have participants present their storyboards. If it's a smaller group, you may want to have participants present to the large group and not break them up so that everyone can hear the healthy changes that were made. However, if it's a larger group of people, and due to time, because we only have that 45-minute block in the morning and that half-an-hour block after lunch, it may be helpful to split participants into their TA breakout groups to have smaller groups to present to. Or you can do it informally and have participants do a gallery walk where the storyboards are displayed, and the programs can then walk through and view each board. However, make sure that there's time for participants to ask other programs questions about how they implemented the healthy changes within the programs and how they overcame some of the barriers that they may have faced, including some of the successes that they might have had. Encourage participants really to take some time during this segment to write down different ideas that they heard, that they liked, and they might want to go back and implement in their program because those ideas can be built off of for their long-term action plan. You'll see on the agenda here from 10:15 to 11:30, we will start with Part A and discuss how providers can support motor development. Part A focuses on strategies providers and families can use to support a child's motor development. We really emphasize fine and gross motor development within this segment and also give you an opportunity to introduce or reintroduce your state's early learning standards or guidelines. So before the learning session, please take some time to locate your state's early learning standards and your infant-toddler developmental guidelines if your state has them. Make copies and be prepared to distribute them during this section. You'll notice within the presentation, within the PowerPoint, that we have Louisiana's early learning standards listed on those slides, but please feel free to replace those slides with pictures of your state early learning standards. Once the participants are reintroduced to the early learning standards during the presentation, they will then use them for an activity that we call connecting the dots. Participants will work in small groups to create an activity or identify one that they like using within their program for both infants or toddlers as well as preschoolers. They will then identify the gross and fine motor skills that were used in that activity and discuss the early learning standard or standards that it meets. Please have a few volunteers, time permitting, to report out the activities they came up with and really encourage a large group discussion. Next, we have lunch. Again, you have 45 minutes dedicated to it. And just make sure participants are back by 12:15 to continue with their storyboard presentation. So after lunch, as I stated before, this is just a continuation of those storyboard presentations. And you'll continue the presentations as well as continue building that bar graph of the Let's Move childcare goals. And this segment's a little bit shorter. It's about half an hour from 12:15 to 12:45. So next we have Part B, facilitating change in your program. So after those storyboard presentations, go ahead and break participants up into their TA breakout groups or keep them in as a large group if that's what you usually do, and use the next 45 minutes to discuss the action period tasks for Learning Session 3. I'll go into those tasks in more detail on the following slides. So during the Learning Session 3 action period, the leadership team should find about 1 to 2 hours to train their program staff, about the same amount of time it's been taking them for the Learning Session 1 and Learning Session 2 action periods. They'll use the Sesame Street Healthy Habits for Life toolkit to complete the Learning Session 3 group discussion worksheet. This toolkit will be introduced in Part C of this presentation, where you discuss the best practices for physical activities for preschoolers. The leadership team should also start the long-term action plan worksheet and complete it during this time. Using the 5 areas of improvement that they identified from the Go Knapsack results that they completed during the Learning Session 1 action period, they will choose 1 or 2 additional areas to work on. These should be additional goals or a continuation of a larger goal if they're trying to, for example, if they're trying to overhaul their menu and they started that with their pilot action plan, they can continue that now with their long-term action plan. Or they may want to start fresh and have additional areas that they want to work on. An electronic version of the long-term action plan worksheet is available through the Let's Move Childcare website, as well as through our Cubby link. Leadership teams should also collaborate with program staff to create another storyboard documenting the changes the program has made through their long-term action plan. Their storyboard should start after Learning Session 3 during that action period, but it does not have to be brought back until Learning Session 5, because we want to give them that full amount of time between Learning Session 3 and Learning Session 5 to really implement those healthy changes that they're trying to reach. Participants should then place the Learning Session 3 group discussion worksheet and the long-term action plan worksheet in a large envelope with their program name and bring it to Learning Session 4. Again, storyboards will not be brought to Learning Session 4. They will be brought to Learning Session 5 for presentations at that time. And here's just the slide correlating with the information we just discussed. So also within this segment, please walk participants through the sample long-term action plan in their participant handbook. Go ahead and inform participants that one worksheet should reflect one goal. If there is more than one goal, so say they want to overhaul their menu and are focusing on healthy food, they may also want to focus on physical activity. In that case, 2 worksheets should be completed, one for healthy food and one for physical activity. Shown here is just a sample goal, and this one focuses on healthy eating. To remind participants that this is similar to the goal-setting activities done in Learning Session 2 and 3. The participants will be thinking about the how, what, who, when, and where of their desired goal through the use of this worksheet. Please notice that we break down the steps of each goal they want to accomplish, but also dedicate who is responsible for completing those tasks. And on the worksheet that you can find in the implementation guide and the participant handbook, you'll see that there's a date section as well, so that they know when they need to accomplish those tasks. Please remember that this is just an example on this slide to get participants started. They do not have to use a goal for healthy eating, but they should be thinking about goals around any of the areas discussed in Learning Session 1 through Learning Session 3, including healthy eating and beverages, physical activity, screen time, and breastfeeding support. Next, we'll move on to Part C, which is the best practices for physical activity for preschoolers. And this is from about 1:30 to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So this segment starts off with an overview of the benefits of physical activity. It is then followed by a 7-minute video from the National Resource Center, which shows simple ways providers can weave physical activity into their program and their existing curriculum. This segment is then broken up with a physical activity using the Sesame Street Healthy Habits for Life toolkit. Please explain to participants and even distribute it at this time that they will receive 1 per program in order to support intentional physical activity within their program. This activity, after it's conducted, is then followed by a goal-setting activity. So remember to encourage participants to focus on, again, the how, what, who, when, and where of the desired change. Encourage participants to think of how they might incorporate this activity into their existing program. This activity, as I mentioned before, will also be used during the action period in order for leadership teams to complete the Learning Session 3 group discussion worksheet with their staff. Also during this segment, you'll distribute the NMOR's Best Practices for Physical Activity Guide. Inform participants the majority of the information in this section will come from this guide, which is aligned with the Let's Move Child Care goals, as well as the Caring for Our Children's Preventing Childhood Obesity Standards, that book that they received during Learning Session 1. So go ahead and take some time to review the contents of that guide with the participants, particularly on the pages containing best practices for physical activity and screen time, as well as family tip sheets. There's great family tip sheets in there that they can copy and send home to parents. There's also sample policies in there that might help guide their long-term action plans. So this is just a great reference tool for them to have in general. So in order to complete the goal-setting activity at the learning session, you'll need to turn to page 22 in the Sesame Street Healthy Habits for Life Toolkit and conduct the Hokey Pokey Muscles and Bones activity. You'll need to split participants up into small groups and ask them to form a circle, and then ask them to act out the Hokey Pokey as you sing it. Again, participants are expected to use this activity with their program staff to complete that Learning Session 3 group discussion worksheet during the action period. So we know it's silly, and you may be a little uncomfortable singing it, but it's just a fun time for everybody to become familiar with the activity so that they can take it back to their program staff, because they're going to have to conduct it with their own program staff. So it's a great opportunity to introduce it. In addition to the resources that they'll receive, they also have resources that are already preloaded onto the USBs that they should have received at Learning Session 1. So while this slide just shows January, and again, this is the Head Start Body Start calendar, their flash drives, or the USBs, contain the full 12-month calendar. So each day of the month contains a nutrition activity or physical activity that the providers can do with the children. However, these are very general activities that don't take a lot of resources or time, and so we really encourage you to encourage the providers to send this home to parents as well each month to encourage more physical activity at home. This might be something that they want to print on the back of the menu if they send that home as well. So moving on to Part D, this is the best practices for physical activity for now infants and toddlers. And this will be presented from about 2 o'clock to 2:15 in the afternoon. So this segment will review important aspects of infant-toddler motor development, including sensory actions, control skills, and exploratory actions, and ways that participants can plan for and support it. To understand the various developmental stages of preschoolers, it is vital to understand the development of infants and toddlers. So knowledge of infant and toddler stages of development really lays the foundation for future developmental stages. Therefore, you might have some participants say that they don't have infants and toddlers enrolled in their program, and they might check out during this segment. But really emphasize that knowing sensory development is important to know and share that information with parents that may have infants or toddlers at home, even if they're not enrolled in the program. It can also help parents and providers identify any developmental delays in their child or children in their care. This segment starts with a 3-minute video of a baby attempting to roll over. This demonstrates the need for infants to explore their surroundings and experiment with movement or proper development. In addition to the video, the best practices and a rationale for physical activity for both infants and toddlers are explained. The 4 sensory actions are then discussed to ensure programs take these into account when implementing activities with each age group. So please stress the need for providers to actively engage those infants and toddlers in order to enhance their development. They should actively engage this group as much as they engage with the preschoolers. Next, we have the best practices for screen time for all age groups, including infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. This segment includes the best practices for screen time, as well as a 7-minute video from the National Resource Center called Screen-Free Moments promoting healthy habits. This video shows ways providers can reduce or ideally eliminate screen time in their program. Also in this segment, you'll reintroduce the nutrition and wellness tips for young children. That's that CACFP handbook that they most likely received in Learning Session 2. And this is just to reintroduce it to inform them that the resource contains a great list of screen-free activities that they can do in their program. The segment then ends with the Go Slow or WOW activity to quiz participants on what they've learned about the best practices for physical activity and screen time for all age groups. So following the Go Slow or WOW chart, you can find that in your implementation guide. You can see there a chart, and you'll read each statement, and the participants should either run in place if the statement is recommended, walk slowly in place if the statement calls to limit a practice, or stand still if the practice is not recommended. Again, that activity can be found in your implementation guide. Just make sure that you're stating the statement and not necessarily the answers to it, because if the best practice that you state is not recommended, or the statement you say is not recommended, we really want participants to think about why and what is the actual best practice. So then after, if people are standing and it's part of the WOW portion of the activity, then participants can call out what the actual best practice is that they learned. So at the end, we have Part E, and this is the Bringing It All Together section. This is the last segment of the day, and it lists ways providers can engage families through sending home information such as the family tip sheets that's found in the NMOR's Best Practices for Physical Activity Guide, or the USDA Be an Active Family handout shown here on the slide. This can also be found in the participant handbook, and it's on the Let's Move Child Care website. This handout lists 10 simple ways families can spend time together while increasing their physical activity. This segment also reminds participants of the resources that can be used to intentionally plan for physical activity throughout the day. Both the physical activity kits, including the tossing and catching one and the moving and dancing one, as well as the Sesame Street Healthy Habits for Life toolkit, provide great grab-and-go lessons for providers. So hopefully they had an idea of that as you were introducing it throughout the learning session. The last thing they'll see at the learning session is a video called Increased Physical Activity and Nutrition in Child Care Programs, to just give them additional ideas of how to improve physical activity practices and nutrition practices on education in their program. Then use the last 15 minutes of the day to have participants read through and fill out the feedback form. And we really do look at these. We look at each one in order to gauge participants' liking or dislike of certain segments of the day in order to adjust the curriculum in the future. So make sure everything is filled out, and especially the individual's information, so that Gretchen Swanson Center for Nutrition, our group that does the evaluation component, can accurately document this participant information, which they then send to us. The project coordinator should then send all of the evaluation tools to Gretchen Swanson shortly after the learning session. So I know we covered a lot of information today. So please, if you have any questions or concerns, please talk them over with your project coordinator, or feel free to come to Brianna and I if you have any questions or concerns as you prepare for the learning session. You can see our contact information is listed there on the screen. That concludes the Learning Session 3 webinar. I hope that this provided you with the information that you need to run a successful learning session. Thank you and have a great day.